So a little while back, TommyInnit was trending on Twitter again in a big way. And big surprise, I, a Minecraft YouTuber, wanted to get my own 2 cents in on the recent drama so I can cash in on the subject before it becomes even more irrelevant and out of date than it already assuredly is. Now, I'm sure you're sick to death of clickbait titles and melodramatic pog-facing thumbnails telling you that the dream situation is crazy. However, that's not really what I want to focus on here today. Don't get me wrong, a formal analysis of the drama is a part of what I'm hoping to achieve here, since I think a lot of the other videos on the subject have been insipid, shallow, and reactionary. But to understand how tensions even escalated to this boiling point, we have to understand the perspective of its participants, the perspective of one of those participants in particular. To me, this recent controversy has given us more questions than answers, and it's these questions that I want to examine today. I don't think there are any easy answers to be found because this entire controversy is messy, flawed, vitriolic, and ultimately human. Despite all of this though, I do still think it's a discussion worth having, not only because of what it tells us about Tommy, but what it reveals to us about ourselves. Innit, linguistically speaking, is a curious little interjection. It's less of an actual question and more of a rhetorical assertion from across the pond, an artifact of culture and the divide across the Atlantic once the colonies broke off. But now, in the wake of several consecutive controversies that rocked his entire world and upended his life, the Innit in Tommy's username is seeming less like a rhetorical question and more like a genuine one. Because in spite of it all, it is still Tommy, isn't it? That, to me, is the TommyInnit question. A question currently being posed to us, the viewing public, and a question that only Tom himself can answer. And to me, this question is threefold. In the wake of everything that's happened, who is TommyInnit now, how has he handled this latest controversy, and where does he go next? In this video, I want to tackle all 3 parts of this question head-on. And hopefully, in analyzing Tommy as an example, we can learn a little bit more about the nature of content creation itself, as well as how to handle controversy and cancellation. So, without further ado, let's begin to unravel the enigma that is the TommyInnit question. Longtime viewers of the program will know that this isn't the first video I've made about TommyInnit or his journey as a content creator. A long time ago, I posited that the reason for Tommy's success was his inherent relatability to the particular audience he'd found on Twitch and YouTube. When Tommy first started out in the space, he was an almost comically starry-eyed kid, given the unprecedented chance to stand side by side with some of his entertainment idols. He was simply a fan of all of the creators his fans were fans of too. In many ways, he was just like them. This wasn't just a case of the audience obtaining vicarious satisfaction through his humorous exploits, though I suspect that was part of it. His earnestness was also endearing in of itself. His sense of humor was a bit juvenile, but that's because he was too. This was the same core tenet at the heart of his character on the Dream SMP, too. Canon Tommy was younger than his friends and the world around him, and that was revealed to us through his interactions with other characters, in the way he placed great importance on material things, possessions, and places as tactile symbols of friendship and love. He was often too loud and cringe and uneducated, but this reality and rawness offered his audience a unique angle from which to view his work. They got to grow up alongside Tommy in real time. All of that is who Tommy was, though, not who Tommy is now. And even now, I don't think my previous analysis of the factors contributing to Tommy's success was wrong, per se. In fact, I think a lot of this still rings true, albeit in broad strokes. But what went unsaid in this analysis was what an unenviable position he had thrust upon him at such a formative age. Tommy was failed profoundly by his mentors and role models in ways that he wouldn't truly understand until he was more emotionally mature later on in life. And at the very same time, he was expected to be a mentor and role model to his viewership, too. In the span of a single year, he lost so many people close to him. One to an insidious and deadly disease, and one to an insidious web of lies, deceit, and abuse he had intentionally blinded even his best friends to. Reeling from just one loss of this sort would be debilitating. But dealing with the loss of his trust in the aftermath of Wilbur's betrayal, on top of the grief and pain he was already struggling to reckon with from techno, is the sort of thing that profoundly reshapes a man. For so many years, Tommy was the sort of person who wouldn't speak up for fear of rocking the boat, not wanting to lose his friends or start a fight. But now that he's grown up and found his voice, it seems more and more like he's determined to use it to change the space he grew up in, to try and course-correct the culture, to address its very real power imbalances and tendency to shame into silence. It's this very culture of content creation itself that shaped Tom into becoming the man he is today. And I think understanding that context is important to understand how he tackled this most recent drama, too. I've long held the theory that Minecraft's perennial popularity on the platform of YouTube follows a sort of gold rush model. At its peak, the Dream SMP was pulling in numbers that were frankly unfathomable and unheard of for any kind of independent internet content creation, period. A rising tide lifts all ships. This is the nature of the game. Most everyone, even those with legitimate reservations or grievances, swallows them down and silences their doubts out of fear of being ostracized or blacklisted from the space. Even voicing reasonable objections can be a cause for controversy, so it's better to just keep quiet or voice them in such a way that you can give them a seemingly positive spin. It's not easy being this conflicted. I remember that sometimes, back then, I did the same. And I'm just a scum-sucking, bottom-feeding leech in the content creation scene, a small fish. Imagine how much harder it must be for someone actually involved in and affected by matters like this. Someone like Tommy, who still has to hold his tongue and carry this internal contradiction just to keep the peace. But now we're living in the aftermath of the gold rush, wandering through desolate ghost town streets, watching tumbleweeds blow by lazily. Things stabilize, no more meteoric highs, but less of a chance that the ground crumbles beneath your feet and the world bottoms out. When the last vein of ore has been drained dry and the gold is gone, the vultures descend to feast, knives out and beaks bloody. If it ever feels like content creation is a cutthroat game, or if people are two-faced and turn on each other at the drop of a hat, it's because that's exactly how its culture was designed. Everyone's really just saying what they were thinking all along. They only feel free to speak out once the penalty of perjury in the court of public opinion is gone. And that brings us back to the present day, because this is precisely the tone and atmosphere in which Dream began instigating this most recent wave of drama by picking a fight with Tommy's fans. Tommy had no intention whatsoever of antagonizing Dream, not to begin with. In fact, up until that point, Dream wasn't involved in the slightest. Tommy was merely bantering about other content creators circling the drain of the right-wing grifting pipeline, and before his name was even invoked, Dream inserted himself into the discourse with the posting of that infamous meme. But the Tommy that faced this oncoming storm isn't the same Tommy as before. He wasn't a kid anymore. He had weathered these winds of change and had changed profoundly for it. And so instead of laying down and simply taking it, he stood his ground and stood up for himself, knowing full well that Dream intended to subject him to a maelstrom of manipulation in return. In order to truly understand this maelstrom of manipulation that Tom's been put through, though, we have to actually wade into the murky quagmire of the recent Dream drama on a formal, analytical level. Now, like I said, I don't want to relitigate the same old tired debate you've been hearing for the past few weeks, but that being said, even though that discourse is mostly done, I want to exhume its decomposing corpse because I think I have something new to add, a unique perspective on the whole ordeal that can hopefully bring some much-needed clarity and closure to this profoundly sad saga. So, grab your notebooks, viewers at home, and turn to page 1 because you're about to get a Frostbyte Freeman philosophy lecture. A philosophy of language lecture, to be precise, and yes, this will be on the test. Broadly conceived in the philosophy of language tradition, a speech act has 3 basic components. You have the syntax of a sentence, the literal grammatical composition of its construction, which we won't be focusing on very much here. Second, you have sentence semantics, which is basically what the sentence means in a very literal and conventional sense. But third, and most importantly of all, you have the pragmatic effect of the sentence's utterance. Pragmatics provides us a different conception of meaning than semantics. Rather than being grounded in internal mental states and intentions, things which do not exist and cannot manifest in the outside world, pragmatics observes the effect a sentence has on the world around it when it is uttered, because this effect is still a pivotal part of meaning, too. During his response and in subsequent live streams, Dream's defense of his actions depends very heavily on his own self-perception as a victim. He believes people simply didn't understand what he meant. But this idea of what Dream meant is rooted in the murky business of intentions, mental intentions, which are notoriously impossible to prove. I don't want to speculate on Dream's intentions here. That's not my place. Dream can claim they were pure, but it's impossible to prove one way or the other. But I also don't think that knowing what Dream's intentions were is even remotely relevant to the discourse. I don't think Tommy's intentions are relevant either, but unlike Dream, Tommy's never tried to dispute the pragmatic effect of his words. He said exactly what he meant, and he meant exactly what he said, and he stood on that bit of business despite the firestorm that ensued. Perhaps you might argue that he could have framed his actions more tactfully or constructively or respectfully, but regardless of how you feel, you cannot argue that he unequivocally took accountability for them. The only one who cares about what was meant in this whole business was Dream, and it's why we've had to employ this level of formal analysis to cut through the murky fog of confusion he's intentionally cultivated to obfuscate his own actions. That's precisely the reason why we need to bring in some philosophy of language tools here in order to decode this drama. Got it? Good. So now that we've outlined the broader overarching structure that philosophy of language arguments take, let's zoom back in on the specific case of Dream's slur use to better appreciate its pragmatic effects. Kulka is a philosopher of language and professor at Georgetown University and a senior research scholar at the Kennedy Institute of Ethics. In my readings, I personally have found that their oft-cited and tremendously influential paper, Slurs, Interpolation, and Ideology, published in the Southern Journal of Philosophy in 2018, provides the best lens for formally framing the discourse about Tommy, Dream, and the much-maligned meme the latter posted. To give you a broad overview of their philosophy, Kulka does not believe that slurs are magic, naughty, no-no words with some sort of special power. They believe that slurs are simply words, and like all words, they can be analyzed on a philosophical level to understand both their meaning and the effect of their use. They are still words with power, yes, words that should not be wielded wantonly or to injurious effect, but they are words all the same, and formally treating them as such provides us with much more fruitful analysis. Kulka also believes that slurs exist as a vessel for the transmission of ideology, specifically hateful ideology, and they break this function of the act of slurring down into 3 separate mechanisms. 3 criteria that slur use must meet. First, slurs are generic. In order to be effective at catching attention and causing harm, which is the goal of slurs when used in hate speech and to spread hateful ideology, slurs have to be recognizable as a sort of hail, as invoking the identity of a specific minority group in abstract in general as a generality. This creates an implicit in-group, out-group relation between the wielder of the slur and the individual being slurred at. To quote Kulka, a slur recognizes someone not just as having a specific identity, but as reduced to an instance of that identity, as interchangeable with any other member of the group. Second, slurs derogate. This is the most obvious and commonly observed quality of slurs. They denigrate, furthering the in-group, out-group distinction created by the instance of this generic imagined identity to insist that it is also inferior to. To quote Kulka once more, they recognize someone as having an abject or lesser identity, and according to the logic of ideology, they recognize that abjection or lesser value as inhering naturally in the person's character. Third, slurs subordinate. This means that not only are they derogatory, they are demeaning, and through their use, they call upon an implicit power differential to assert their wounding force. To quote Kulka one more time, the use of the slurring name not only reflects but constitutes a kind of subordinating speech, which positions the one slurred in a less empowered position than the one using the slur. The impact of Kulka's analysis on the case at hand should be abundantly obvious by now. Because slurs are inherently ideologically charged, reclamation of their use on a macro-societal level by marginalized groups can potentially pose its own problems. The most commonly observed case of the reclamation of slurs occurs in micro-social contexts where members of the group are accustomed and attuned to the same community of practice. You see this all the time on Twitter or in predominantly black counterculture historically. Friend groups who share similar identities will hail each other using words that ordinarily have a derogatory connotation. However, because both of these friends are part of that same community of practice and have themselves been derogated, the offending word has less of an injurious effect. This is because these uses of the slur do not meet the second and third of Kulka's criteria. They do not derogate or subordinate, as it were, since those using the word exist on an equal playing field and share the same identity. Now that we've framed the technical apparatus of our analysis, let's put it into practice. Dream's argument is that his own neurodivergence allows him to reclaim the offending slur in question. From my armchair philosopher's position, however, there's 2 key problems with this. First, Dream is not attuned to the same community of practice that Tommy's fans are. When Dream uses this word to describe Tommy's fans and followers, he is doing so from an outside perspective. The identity of being a TommyInnit stan is construed as lesser to him, echoing shades of Kulka's second mechanism for slurring. And secondly, for someone who consistently complains about being taken out of context, Dream's rather conveniently avoiding the context of this speech act. Just look at the actual framing of this meme, at the bright and sunny path on the left, then the dark and stormy path on the right. This mimetic format is obviously meant to code our perception in such a way that one of these two choices is significantly less desirable than the other. You might say, in fact, that one of these two paths is subordinate to the other, an inferior road, an inferior identity. To me, then, there can be no mistake. Perhaps you agree with me already, or perhaps you don't, that's your prerogative. But using this threefold test, I believe that this is a case of someone using this ableist slur with an unambiguously pejorative force. Dream's own neurodivergence doesn't enable him to reclaim this word in such a way where he can wield its uniquely injurious effect against others, nor does it excuse him from the consequences of its use. And now that we've proven the point in exhaustive detail by way of example, we can cross-apply this same pragmatic framing to the rest of Dream's responses to the ensuing drama. Regardless of what you think Dream intended here semantically with this meme, it is impossible to ignore that the pragmatic effect of this meme was the use of a slur. Regardless of what you think Dream intended here in his response video semantically, it is impossible to ignore that the pragmatic effect of associating Tom with child labor was to imply that Tommy himself was directly and legally culpable for felonious practices. Regardless of what you think Dream intended throughout this entire dramatic saga semantically, it doesn't let him off the hook for the pragmatic effect of his actions. And it's this pragmatic effect, specifically, that he's refused to apologize for. He isn't offering explanations for his actions, he's offering excuses. Hopefully, all of that makes sense to you. For me, at least, it's the most helpful way to frame the dramatic reawakening of the Dream SMP drama. It's the best way to make sense of the powder keg of long-simmering tensions and unexpressed resentments that were all let out in a single catastrophically cathartic Twitter feud. Because, tragic though it is, that's what I think Tommy and Dream's flame war was, the inevitable. If genuine grievances like these get ignored for too long or dismissed by one of the parties involved, then the only way to move forward is to put the past all out there in the open, in the hopes that sunlight might act as a disinfectant. So what can we learn from all this? What's the takeaway here? Well, let's start with what the Tommy and Dream drama teaches us about handling controversy, because the things both sides did right and wrong make for a pretty interesting example. Firstly, in handling controversy, it goes without saying that a public confrontation and conflagration is a matter of last resort. By and large, the anxiety, negativity, and noise it generates for both parties just isn't worth it in the end. However, in cases where all other options have been exhausted or an existing power differential means you have no other recourse, like in the case of Tommy and Dream, handling things in the light of day becomes an unfortunate necessity. Secondly, if controversy does turn to the public square, it's important to try and have appreciation for the mutual human complexity of all participants involved. Drama is often messy, and under great duress, no one is a perfect actor or acts perfectly. Don't rush to deny, decry, or condemn. That said, though, it's still of the utmost importance to take allegations seriously, especially if they're severe. Striking this balance is absolutely critical to engage critically with a controversy of any kind. Third, and finally, try to take a pragmatic outlook. Remember, the fact that you mean well doesn't really mean anything. Your intentions exist only to you, so don't assume others know what you mean. Even if your intentions are good, the pragmatic effects of what you say might have a different or more hurtful meaning to others. Grounding yourself in this externalist mindset can enable you to take a step back and see the bigger picture. It makes it easier to see ways in which you might be wrong, too, which at the very least can help to de-escalate or ease tensions, and on net, I'd say that's a good thing. But that still leaves us with one more big unanswered question, the TommyInnit question. Who is Tommy now, and where does he go from here? Well, for starters, he's not the same man as the TommyInnit we first met, but that's to be expected, because you can never really go back to the way things were before. Nor should we, in fact. He still retained a fondness for storytelling. I don't think he would have returned to the Dream SMP to give his character's arc a proper conclusion if he didn't. He's shown tremendous discernment in terms of how he's exercising his power and platform. For instance, not only shouting out the independent Minecraft machinima project of White Pine to support more ambitious art like this in the future, but participating in its production with a cameo in Episode 4. And he still loves just goofing around in Minecraft with his friends, making silly videos to make people laugh. His sense of humor is a bit more mature now, but still just as brash and abrasive. He still makes mistakes, can be insensitive or crude sometimes, but he's capable of recognizing it in the moment and always strives to better himself regardless. I think the very MacDonald-esque delivery of the most widely discussed joke from Tom's new Weekend Update-inspired show sums up his personal growth better than I ever could.
Mr. Beast broke 28 Guinness World Records while filming his new Amazon show, Beast Games. However, there is no award for accidentally befriending the most groomers. If there was, though, it would probably go to me.
This is self-deprecating and yet wildly funny. He's endured a lot of pain to get to this place of contemplative reflection, but he's willing to poke fun at it too. He knows he isn't the only one who was hurt by all this, who lost someone, who was betrayed. His audience grew up alongside him and they shared in a small fraction of all of this too. So by allowing them to laugh, he's giving everyone an opportunity to grieve. Together. So, who is TommyInnit now? Well, if you ask me, he's a creator. Not in the sense of being a mere content creator in the typical sense, in the sense where you supply slop to the sacrificial altar of the algorithm and slavishly chase the latest trends, but in the sense of being a creative, one who creates. He has aspirations and designs beyond being just a YouTuber as an end in of itself. For Tom, the internet is now a means to the end of his true creative passions. And though he's still figuring out what those are, I think it's only a matter of time before he does. Whether it's creating joy or laughter through his stand-up comedy, or creating stories and characters through Minecraft as a medium, this creative direction is the guiding light that's likely going to illuminate the path his content takes going forward. To answer the question we set out with, Tommy doesn't totally know who he is yet or where he's going to go next. But that's okay. He's figuring it out, and in the wake of everything that's happened, that's about the only thing I think you could ask from him. That's just my take, though. My cold take, if you will, since you can't really call it a hot take if the raging inferno of controversy has already died down. But I digress. That's going to do it for this one. Now I'm Frostbyte Freeman, and until next time, stay frosty.